looking at it, the topic of mediation does not immediately strike you as being terribly fascinating. But after we set the schedule for this program, I did take a look at it, and his writing style is really interesting. It's not what you think. When I read the section on Afghanistan, and he touched on my favorite Afghani topic, the national sport of buzkashi, I knew he was writing on the style that I enjoy. I'm not going to do a long introduction because I think part of Roger's talk is going to be about his background and what he's actually done. But there is one other interesting note I'll add. On the back cover of his book, he says that he currently resides in Iowa, but his only home is the internet. And I guess that means that Roger's homeless right now because his website is temporarily down. So let's welcome Roger Plunk to see what he has to inform us about.
Thank you. This is going to be very informal. I haven't prepared a speech because I always find that each audience is unique. And so when I prepare something, I always end up not going with it because of the audience, the interaction with the audience. So first thing, can the people in the back hear? Okay. Now I was invited originally to Afghanistan in 1997 as an independent mediator, meaning not a government mediator, someone who's independent from any government or organization, by the Northern Alliance and the Taliban. And so I left on Halloween, night of Halloween in 1997 for Afghanistan. Flew into Islamabad and took a bus from Islamabad to Peshawar. Peshawar is the city in Pakistan right next to the border of Afghanistan. So this was my first experience of Afghanistan, or the culture, the Muslim culture. And when I was on the bus, we stopped at one point for everyone to get off and do their prayers, their evening prayers. And in the Islamic world, many of you know this, but they have this tradition of praying 5 times a day. And if you're not used to it, it's a novel thing. Everyone in the bus, they get out and they go, and there's this little mosque. If there's no mosque, they make something, right? And when I was in Afghanistan, traveling with Masood was the leader of the Northern Alliance. He's called the foreign minister. He used to refer to himself as Commander Masood. But he was basically the de facto leader of the whole alliance. He was assassinated 2 days before the September 11th attack by the same people who organized the attack on New York and Washington.
We know that. We know that.
Pretty sure, yeah. By the network, Bin Laden network. There are only so many organizations in the world that use suicide bombings. And Masood was considered to be the person that was the strongest opposition to the Taliban. Anyway, when I was traveling with him, he would stop, on occasion, and for prayers, and he would lead the prayers. And he was a military commander, and he was with the soldiers, and there was no mosque or anything. And he would be basically the priest, in a sense. He would lead the prayers. The thing about Afghanistan that strikes me most is that there's this dichotomy between this extreme friendliness on the one hand and all this violence. Whenever I was wandering around talking to people, they're very friendly. They're always asking, "Oh, come to our home, have dinner, have tea. How are you doing? How is your, are you married? Are you this?" and so forth. And they're just very, very friendly. Whenever they meet, there's this universal greeting where they put their hands to their chest or their heart and do this or sometimes this, and they say shalom, which means peace, right? So the greeting is always peace. but they're fighting. But they want peace. That's the main thing. The children, they're always running around, skipping, always happy. And yet, when I was there, I knew that there's tremendous amount of malnutrition. There's all this fear. The relatives, many of them didn't have fathers or even mothers because they're killed. And they're surrounded by all this destruction. And yet, a child has this innocence that somehow envelopes the child, and they live in this sort of like this blissfulness. At some point, the bubble, bursts. But it's just interesting to see this innocence in the midst of all this violence and tragedy. When I was driving on the bus to Peshawar, one of the interesting things is going through a small village before Peshawar, which was lined, the whole block was lined with stores selling AK-47s. And Pakistan, during the Soviet occupation, Pakistan was given about $3 billion of aid by the United States. And Pakistan gave the money, not necessarily the money, but the food, other aid, weapons, to fundamentalists to fight against the Soviets. So what they did is they created this huge monster called militant fundamentalism. There are also moderates fighting against the Soviets. For example, Massoud. Massoud was considered to be the greatest mujahideen fighting the Soviets. And the Wall Street Journal referred to him as the Afghan who won the Cold War. And the reason is because it's mainly according to the author, or the writer of the article, the reason why the Soviet Union fell is to a large extent Afghanistan. And Massoud was the chief opposition to the Soviets. He would draw their forces into this long valley called Panjshir Valley and string them out and counterattack. And he would do this again and again and just destroy them. And so Massoud, the Lion of Five Lions, as he was called, so Massoud was not giving anything from Pakistan, but he ended up being one of the greatest fighters, oppositions to the Soviets. The sin of the United States really is not so much their direct policy of opposing the Soviets as how they did it. They went in, they gave all this aid to Pakistan, and gave Pakistan a free hand on how to build up this opposition. And this created this monster called militancy. And then when the Soviets left, the United States also left. And Bush has commented on this on occasion, saying, well, we left before, but this time we're not going to leave. We're going to stay, and we're going to make sure that there's some sort of program to restore Afghanistan, to build a democracy. And there are times when I'm very, very impressed by Bush's policies. Not always, but there are times. So Pakistan created this monster, and it's this monster that we're dealing with today. The Taliban are not really an Afghan organization. It was created by the Taliban, by Pakistan. It consists of basically 1/3 Pakistanis, and I'm talking about the army. Thousands of Arabs, meaning individuals from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt, and from these other places. And the rest are Pashtun, Afghans. And the strongest fighters are the Arabs. The Taliban themselves are from a sort of like a minority clan within the Pashtun minority group. And in that sense, they don't even represent the whole Pashtun ethnic group. Now, to understand Afghanistan, you have to understand this ethnic salad. It's not really a melting pot. It's more like a salad. You have all these different groups that are not, they don't really melt together, but they maintain their identity. So you have, surrounding Afghanistan, you have Iran, and Iran are Shiite Muslims. This is complicated, a little complicated. The Afghans are Sunni. The Muslim world is divided between the Shiites and the Sunni. Sort of like the Catholics and the Protestants, in a sense. So in Afghanistan, you have the Hazara, who are Shiites. So there's this correlation between the Hazara and Iran. Then you have Tajikistan. And you have this portion of Tajiks in Afghanistan, about 20%, 25%. Hazara is about 20%. You have Uzbekistan. And then you have this Uzbek ethnic group in Afghanistan, about 10% or so. And then you have the Pashtuns. Pashtuns are about 40%. And the Pashtuns, they have this huge tribal network that goes between Afghanistan and Pakistan, of Pashtuns. And so this is the connection between Pakistan and Afghanistan, this large population of Pashtuns. It creates a ethnic unity between the two countries. And so Pakistan has always had this policy of supporting a Pashtun-dominated government. And in their mind, if they have a Pashtun-dominated government, they can have influence in Afghanistan. They can have an Afghanistan that will do their bidding. So when the Soviets left, they put all their support behind the leader of the Pashtun ethnic group, which was fighting the Soviets. His name was Hekmatyar. And this resulted in a great civil war that devastated the country. Hekmatyar put his army on a hill outside of Kabul and shelled it. And when I went to Kabul for the first time, it was just it looked like some of those pictures you see from World War II of London or Germany when they were bombed. It was just all these buildings destroyed. Sad situation. The infrastructure of Afghanistan, meaning the water system, the electrical system, and also the professional infrastructures, the medicine, profession of law, the civil servants, all of this is in shambles. It just barely exists. So the country is in a state of affairs which is incomprehensible. There are millions of Afghans that are facing starvation for this coming winter. One out of every 5 children die before the age of 5. Almost about 70% of all adults are illiterate. And this is the result of 22 years of war. So the great challenge in the war in Afghanistan is not so much toppling the Taliban. It's what to do after the Taliban leave. And this is why Bush has mentioned that, this idea of a Marshall Plan. And we all know what the Marshall Plan did. It took Germany and Europe, devastated by World War II, and put it back on its feet. And we did the same thing with Japan. And by doing that, the United States turned enemies, the Japanese and the Germans, into friends. They're 2 of our greatest allies. So the United States is in a position to do the same thing. If we go in with some sort of Marshall Plan for Afghanistan, help to rebuild the country, not to go in as conquerors, but to go in as, as brothers, and help them rebuild the country, then we'll transform this country transform the culture into friends, a friendly area where there's no possibility for terrorists to take refuge in. So this is what I call winning the peace. You have to win the war, but then you have to win the peace. If you win the war and just leave, then the whole problem will reoccur again. You know, this monster that was created through Pakistan of this militancy is not going to go away anytime soon. It has to be transformed. And this means the thinking has to be transformed. All right? So this involves a tremendous amount of effort on the part of the international community to go in, to provide education, to provide medicine, to provide expertise for their civil servants, and to give money for Islamic schools that actually teach Islam and not militancy. Throughout Pakistan, you have what they call madrasas, which are Islamic. They're Islamic schools, but it's not real Islam, right? It's militancy. Every other sentence they say Jews are American and Americans are the oppressors, right? So this is the premise, one of the premises in which they live by. Americans grow up thinking about liberty, freedom, due process of law. These are these are premises in which we think about things. And in their world, the premise is that America is the great oppressor, and the Jews are the great oppressors. And this is taught, from a young age. Bin Laden, when he was a child, was told by his father that he must liberate Palestine. And he was told this when he was 5. His father died when he was about 13. But he carried on this passion. It became a premise, an axiom in their worldview. So to win peace is a long process of re-educating. Re-education actually through schools, and re-education by our own interaction with the Afghans. Going there, demonstrating to them that we're not oppressors, we're liberators. We're here in the world to liberate. Liberate what? We liberate people from poverty, from ignorance, meaning not necessarily spiritual ignorance, but from lack of education, from a low level of technology, for example, any number of things. But the point is that we have to. I'm not talking about we. I'm talking about the United States and the West, meaning Western Europe. Have to create a public relations campaign in Afghanistan and also the Middle East. And I think they're also talking now of a Marshall Plan for the whole Middle East. So this will be, Sudan. Well, Sudan is not in the Middle East, but Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Syria, some sort of economic policy to target the extreme poverty. So there'll be poverty and also this idea of funding Islamic schools which are truly Islamic, which have the support of Islamic scholars throughout the world. In 1981, there is a group of Islamic scholars that came together in a convention. And these are respected scholars throughout the world, from various countries. And they came together and they drafted a human rights declaration. Now, if you go through this human rights declaration, you'll see the same basic human rights that you'll see in any document, meaning the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the International Bill of Rights. So from the Islamic point of view, their concept of rights are very similar to the Western point of view, the Western concept of rights. And they're not that much different. Muhammad came as a liberator for women, not as an oppressor. So the idea, again, is to tap those areas of Islam and strengthen them to counter this militancy that has spread up in Pakistan and other areas of the world. Let me take some questions because I don't know where you guys are. Okay.
Okay, so on this same subject, the thing is that it's not just like the United States and Israel are political oppressors, right? But I believe that a lot of what the more pure of heart but yet somewhat militant Islamic people are against is the cultural rape of MTV America, you know, of our less than high value culture, inexorably all over the world. And so that's one thing, and you haven't kind of...
Well, yeah, the oppressor, well, you know, it differs to a large extent. I mean, I think a lot of these militants don't really have a clear idea of, you know, the United States is oppressor in this respect or that respect. We're oppressors. We're oppressor of Islam. And Islam, there are two conditions for violence or for war. One is for self-defense, which is universal. I mean, that's also, you find that in international law, and one can say natural law. So you have self-defense, and then you have defense against those who oppress their religion, which is connected to self-defense. So they look at the United States and they look at the Jewish state in Israel, and they consider them to be, in some sort of way, to oppress their religion. I mean, that's how they connect it, you know, to Islam. But the United States does not oppress, obviously, does not oppress Islam. The United States stands for freedom of religion. And Islam stands for freedom of religion. Muhammad made it clear that no one is to oppress other religions. Other religions are to be respected. People can become Muslims by free choice, but not by the sword. So this is very much part of Islam. So I think it's really a misconception. That's why I say America has to go in to liberate the ignorance, to enlighten the ignorance, and there's this, Powell has been talking about this in the last few days, that the United States has to counter this idea that's being pushed by various people.
I'm reminded of the Boy Scout who came home from school. He was all beat up. He was bruised and battered. His father said, "What happened?" He said, "I was trying to help a lady across the street and she didn't want to go."
Right.
I'm wondering, why should we assume that these people will come along with us eventually
Right.
on our way of...
Well, not our, for example, democracy. We talk about a new government in Afghanistan that will become a democracy. But that doesn't mean American democracy. There are many types of democracy. And they have their own systems. One of my first jobs was a constitutional advisor for the Dalai Lama. And I had a mentor. And he used to tell me, look, to be a constitutional advisor, the first thing you have to do is you have to look at the culture and study the culture and then devise a way in which you can apply fundamental principles to that culture. Fundamental principles meaning like basic human rights, concept of separation of powers, elections, these things. And you don't want to Americanize it. You want to somehow incorporate it into the culture. But you can't go in as a conqueror. You can't beat them, you know. You have to go in and encourage those people who want democracy, who want human rights, who want to develop the country. And there are a lot of people there. I mean, the majority of people in Afghanistan actually like Americans, as opposed to other Islamic countries. They like Americans, and they like this idea of democracy. And so there's a willingness there. And if there's a willingness, then there's a chance, at least in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I wondered if you could address the issue of future leadership in Afghanistan. The Taliban represents, I think, 40% of a certain ethnic group in Afghanistan. The Northern Alliance is a very split group.
Right, yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So, in order for any plan, humanitarian, to work, leadership needs to be in place, and leadership needs to be trained. No plan in
Right.
the world will work unless we have somebody that will take over leadership. And I was wondering if you could address, or if you have some insight, who would be in a leadership position to bring Afghanistan up to normal situations, normal situations, so everybody would have food, first of all.
Right. Well, they have a process. It's not age old. I mean, it's like going back to the 1700s, called a lawyer jirga. And in the Islamic world, the way to resolve disputes, and this is something that comes from Muhammad. Actually, Buddha had the same idea. If there are disputes, you bring everyone together in a large council, you deliberate and resolve the issues. So, in Afghanistan, whenever there was a problem with the succession of a king, all the tribal leaders would come together. We're talking about, maybe thousands. They come together, a large group, they sit around in small groups, they sip tea, they talk, and somehow, over a period of time, they come to a consensus of who the new king will be. And the program right now that everyone is thinking about is to have a lawyer jirga. And this would consist of, again, a large number of people. When you have a large number of people, when you have, like, let's say 2,000 people, you dilute the power of a minority group. It dilutes, for example, if there's a leader in the Northern Alliance who has a lot of power, and he can only send so many representatives. But once they get into this huge council, that influence is diluted, because you have all these chieftains and these scholars and all kinds of various types of individuals who are going to be involved in a decision of who is to lead Afghanistan. So the Northern Alliance is not really, some people refer to it as a minority group, but it's composed of, there are 4 basic minority groups. There's no majority group. The Pashtuns are the largest minority. So the alliance is the Uzbeks, the Hazara, and the Tajiks. And they do have some Pashtun. And when I was there before, I negotiated an agreement among all the leaders of the alliance. And 2 were Pashtun, 2 of the 9. And, but they don't have a large Pashtun part of their army. They don't have that many soldiers. They have some, but it's not a large segment. So, the perception of the Northern Alliance is not quite what it's painted out to be. However, there is this one problem, that most of the leaders in the Northern Alliance were involved in the Civil War. And so there's not so much confidence in these leaders. But one of the provisions I put in this agreement is a willingness for the leaders of the Northern Alliance to accept people who are neutral as leaders in the government. Neutral means not a leader of the Northern Alliance, and not a leader of the Taliban. So they've made this willingness expressed in this agreement, that they're willing to step aside and elect someone else to take over. And there's really no one in the alliance who has this type of national image to become the president. I mean, there is President Rabbani, but he's been there long enough. And even before the Taliban came, he was talking about having a new type of process to transfer power. So, it boils down to this process called Loya Jirga, having this a large assembly, and it's not going to be easy, because these people have been at war for 22 years, and you have all these different groups who want to have a voice in the formation of the government, and so there's going to be a lot of anger, a lot of shouting, and there may be some more fighting. But they really want, after 22 years of war, they want to have peace. And so as long as this willingness, this desire is there, they'll find a way.
I'm just very skeptical that the United States can keep their nose out of country affairs, Marshall Plan or not.
Yeah.
You have seen in Rwanda where the Western Alliance has changed their mind which tribe to support. And it broke out in a very bitter civil war. The country is still healing. So and I am not really satisfied of your answer, because what I asked you is, do you have any idea, can there be a leadership, somebody, and you mentioned the king, who is in exile, but who has a terrible history, what I read, of corruption.
Well, none of the king is not going to be king again. He's 86. His only role is to be maybe a chairman of the assembly, the Loya Jirga. But he's not going to have any kind of official position in the government. And most likely, there may be, I don't know of anyone in the alliance except for maybe Ismail Khan or Karim Khalili. Khalili is a Hazara. So he's a minority. He has a lot of respect. But he may be, for example, in the cabinet. Ismail Khan may be in the cabinet, but I don't think they're going to be president.
And my personal fear is that all these moderate individuals, and there are disappearing slowly, are being assassinated, and the country will be run again by warlords. I read a report from Amnesty International about the Northern Alliance, and Genghis Khan sounded like a Boy Scout. So I'm just. Well,
I spent 7 months with the Northern Alliance.
Yeah.
And the leaders, well, they're not warlords, they're not war criminals. But what happens in times of war, even take for example the United States in Vietnam, and you had atrocities committed by the United States soldiers. That was even in the case where you had officers trained and the rules of engagement, as they call them. You don't target civilians and so forth. You don't rape. You don't pillage. But it happened. And in Afghanistan, they're very, very independent. And you have this large army. There's fighting, and the commander doesn't have as much control over the soldiers as you would think. So the atrocities don't really, they don't imply, it doesn't really mean, when atrocities occur, it doesn't mean that it was a policy decision by the leader. I mean, it's not something that they like. It's not productive for gaining territory. If you gain territory and commit atrocities, you can't hold the territory because there's going to be resistance. They don't want atrocities. I mean, this is sort of basic So it's counterproductive for a commander to, to have their soldiers commit atrocities. And let me give you an example. There was a commander in the Northern Alliance. He's no longer part of the alliance. In charge of Mazar. This is in the north. He decided, the Taliban approached him and offered him, I think, $500,000 to change sides. So this is not really a good example because this guy was actually bad. So he says, okay, give me the money, I'll change sides. So he gets the money, he gives a little bit to his sub-commanders who have to be involved in this process in order to change sides. He changed sides, the Taliban come into Mazar, and Mazar, you have these Taliban who are Arab and a Pashtun, a different ethnic group. And Mazar, you have a lot of, you have Hazara, you have other, Uzbeks. And the Taliban are committing all these atrocities. They're trying to force them to do things that they don't want to do. If they don't do them, then they kill them. It's just terrible. So they decide this is not a good idea, and they push the Taliban out. There's so much resentment against the Taliban that there are about 1,000 soldiers that were killed. I mean, soldiers who were already taken prisoner, basically prisoners, who were massacred. And so this is not something you can really control. I mean, sometimes you can, but in this type of situation, a lot of it is from the citizens themselves. And then, when Mazar was taking, the Taliban took Mazar again afterwards. This is about a year after I left, or less.
What year was
This is maybe 99, I think, or maybe the end of 98. But Taliban retook Mazar, and thousands of people were killed. It's just real ugly. And the Taliban, the Taliban in Kandahar, who were blamed for it, I'm sure they didn't really give this, this order, kill as many people as you can after you take Mazar. Because it doesn't help them. But you have these commanders in the field who bend to the wishes of their soldiers. And it's just a terrible thing in warfare.
Yeah, I have this, I'm wondering if you could help me perceptually see how, from your eyes, I see that there's a very big credibility problem on the part of the United States within the Islamic region coming forth to combat terrorism when, from what I've read, and it's such a variety of opinion out there, but we've been the terrorists. To the Islamic countries, I mean, our support of Israel, etc., is a terrorist act. And I try to figure out how we're going to go into a region that is, as you painted, this incredibly complex tribal tapestry, most of which is warring. How could we ever hope to bring peace short of just engaging a full-scale guerrilla war and playing their game? And so I think of a radical thought, what would it be, or could it even be, that the U.S. would simply pull out and say, this is ultimately a religious war of, 1,000 years?
Well, there's that type of language after the Gulf War by certain people. Rumsfeld had made a statement, I think, in today's paper, saying that the United States is not going to be involved, in a government after the Taliban are toppled. But I think what he's referring to is that the United States is going to defer that to the United Nations. Not that nothing's going to happen, but that the United States will be involved through the United Nations. But I think the main point I want to emphasize is that there's been so much suffering in Afghanistan, and there's so much suffering now, that it's really, it's really imposed upon them the need, the necessity for peace. You know, by necessity, they want to have peace. It's not, you know, they're tired of war. And I would meet, on a number of occasions, I met young men, you know, 14, 15 years old, who would come up to me. They're trying to build a life for themselves. They're looking to their future, and they tell me, look, you know, we don't want this war. We don't want to be soldiers. We want to be, you know, doctors or whatever. But this war stuff is for the birds. We don't want this. It's this great suffering, and they may not be able to work together very well. But as I mentioned earlier, if the desire is there, then that's all that's needed. You know, they can, as long as the interest is there, as long as they want to, then they can find a way. It's going to be difficult, but it can be achieved.
What I was trying, maybe one way I would ask the question is, in the transition towards peace, if the U.S. and the UN is involved, do you see any other option short of our means to get to peace is going to be basically a guerrilla war? I mean, how do we negotiate a peace in this sense? Or do we just say, look, we're going to commit to peace, but we're going to get there?
No, well, this is what you do. I mean, there are two separate things here. The guerrilla, the military action on the ground against the Arab, I mean, you know, the backbone of the Taliban are basically Arabs and Pakistanis and some Afghans. So there's going to be military engagements with them. On the other hand, there's going to be this collapse of the Taliban regime, right? Well, and the two separate things is the political and the military. And the question is, what do you put in this place, and how do you go about this? And this goes back to the Loya Jirga, the Grand Council. And you want to bring in people who had some association with the Taliban, maybe some moderates in the Taliban. And I got to know, you know, a couple of moderates in the Taliban, leaders, who would be, you know, probably part of this Loya Jirga, and may actually be part of the government. But you don't want to, you don't want any kind of ethnic cleansing of Afghanistan. You want to try to bring people together to work together. And it's a political process. It involves a tremendous amount of mediation, negotiation. And you know, this is what they call, you know, you'll see in the media this phrase, broad-based government. And this is what they're talking about. They're talking about representatives from all the different ethnic groups and traditions, and getting them to come together, work together, and form a government that represents all the different interests, including women's rights. I mean, the Loya Jirga is going to be all men. So what are you going to do with the women's rights issue? And one of the ideas, well, my idea, is to have a Jirga for women, a council. And they come together and they elect a representative, and the representative would have a position in the cabinet, maybe on education or something like that. So there have to be these different ways to bring all these different interests together, to work together.
It is obvious that your emphasis and specialty is on the aspect of creating consensus and peace. I'm wondering if you have an opinion. Yesterday, I think the reports were that the Taliban military was proving to be a much more difficult enemy to the United States than they perhaps originally were considering because of the nature of how they're handling the war. Do you have an opinion on the United States' chances of military success?
the United States would prefer as little casualties as possible, right? So that's why they have this air campaign. And they're coordinating with the Russians. The Russians are building up the Northern Alliance, their military capability. And the United States is providing the air cover. And they're beginning to bomb the front lines in Mazar and Kabul. So the United States provides the air war, basically, and the Northern Alliance provides the ground war. And they're
hiding the military amongst civilians, and they're hiding ammunition in caves which could number.
Right. And a lot of that war is going to be done by the Northern Alliance. And the United States obviously is going to be involved in special operations. They already have been. But they want to play safe. They don't want casualties. So they want to put as much responsibility as they can on the Northern Alliance. After all, it's, to some extent, it's their war, right? And the United States has, it's our war, meaning America's war in a sense, but in the final analysis, it's for the Afghans, because the Afghans have been living in this horrendous situation, and they have to change it. And the Afghans themselves would like to do it. They would like as much responsibility as possible from their side. I mean, they would. In fact, before the air campaign, there was a lot of talk. I was talking to various people involved in the Northern Alliance and with other anti-Taliban groups, and they didn't want the United States to come in. They wanted the United States to wait and help build them up militarily and politically, and keep the Taliban isolated, and let the anti-Taliban forces do the work.
Well, it does sound like a very awkward situation, because it appears as if the United States hasn't decided in camp, because of Pakistan wholeheartedly support the Northern Alliance. So it appears as if, and they have this stated goal, the United States, of crippling the terrorist network. And so I want to repeat the question. Is this not just a huge black hole for the United States?
Well, it's a matter of attitude, right? Is it half empty or half full? Is it an opportunity, or is it a black hole? And it's a bad situation there. The United States should go in and do what it can, make an effort to change things for the better, together with the international community. And you can't do anything by just saying, well, it's a black hole. Let's don't go in there.
Maybe I can restate the question another way. The numbers in Time magazine this week indicate that one of these bombs that we send down is like $1 million.
Right.
Packets. All of the food packets that we sent are $600,000.
Right.
So,
yeah.
What's our most effective method of helping the Afghan people?
Well,
putting the bombs down, or to do something else?
I mean, if I was in charge, if I was in charge, what I would have done is I would have held back from the bombing. I would have put all the support behind the anti-Taliban military forces, beefed them up, and developed the political side, the king, the development of the Lower Jirga and all that. Keep the Taliban isolated, put the pressure on them until they collapse, and allow the Northern Alliance to take all this territory. You don't have to bomb it. And when the Northern Alliance takes Mazar, then they have these, these SAM missiles and all that. You don't have to destroy them. You take them. And during this time, you can, send all this aid in through the trucks. and coordinate with people on the ground. And you know, there's a saying in Afghanistan that you can rent an Afghan, but you can never buy him. So remember the story about the commander in Mazar. He was rented once, then again. So a lot of how territory is taken is by contacting these commanders and working something out with them and paying them off. We'll pay you, $10,000. You come to our side. The Taliban are, their days are up. You heard the president of Pakistan. So this is, this process. There's, the ancient texts, the art of war. The best strategy to win a war is one that takes least violence. If you can win a war without going to battle, then that's the best way. That's the best strategy. So I think there are other ways. It would have taken longer, I think, but in the long run, it would have been better because you wouldn't have created all this anger towards the United States by bombing But that's just, it's a policy judgment. From my point of view, I think it would have been better. But I don't know what was, what ingredients was there in their policy decisions. And the National Security Council.
One of the things that's so hard for
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to share something with you. You brought up the point of Germany and Japan. Now, Germany lost the war, France was occupied, and England won the war. 10 years after the war, Germany's economic standard was the highest. France's was next, and poor old England was way down the bottom.
Right, yeah.
One is in England had to pull herself up by her own bootstraps, where with Germany, we went in and supplied a lot of money to build things up. And this is the tale that I picked up from all the news and everything, how great we are because we went in to build everything up, see?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing with it is they lost the war, so the governing party in Germany was the ones that had our approval, and so they were our people that was put in. And our corporations went over there. They didn't just go over and hand them money. They went over there and they settled in. And I talked to a German family myself that lived in Berlin there, and they had a whole building that they owned. They had a store and everything before the war, and they come in and they bombed the thing, see? Well, after the war, after our government had been put in, they got a notice from the government telling them that they had 1 year in order to build that store back up again, or else they were going to take the property over and sell it to somebody that could build one. Well, they had no money, and they couldn't build it, so the government took it over like for taxes, and guess where the money come? It come from a big corporation owned here in the United States. So when you say, look how Germany has prospered, I mean, there's actually our companies from here going in and prospering it. In the same way with Japan, our companies, I know years ago, I read in the newspaper about in Pittsburgh how a whole, what's the word I want, where they refine steel and stuff.
Refinery?
Yeah, they built a whole plant and shipped the whole thing over to Japan.
Right.
I mean, from one end to the other. And a few years back, I had a friend, and he had another friend that's studying to be a physical chemist, and he was going to go work in the steel mills in Pittsburgh. And when he got out of school, he found out the only place he could work was in Japan, because all the steel went over to Japan. And it's where the who's in power up on top don't mean anything. It's who's got the money down here to control the money. That's what's going to control things. But I'm not putting that out there in order to contradict any of the ideas that you're putting out, because I mean, you still have to have somebody on top, and you still have to work toward that. I'm just trying to say is that when you start holding up Japan and hurting up Germany as there, I mean, that's just like the carpetbaggers going down in the South. Now, when the North won the war, the South got a whole set of laws. They didn't have to have all the government was all there. But in 1960, which is over 100 years after the Civil War was over, when you go into service, people from the South, oh, those damn Yankees, you know, they still was carrying hate on both shoulders for the Yankees because of what the carpetbaggers did when they came in after the war.
Right, and Truman cites that, his experience after the Civil War, as one of the incentives for the Marshall Plan. Because actually the policies of the North against the South were oppressive. It was sort of a revenge type of mentality. And he knew from that experience that it would only cause more war. The best way to win, you have to win the peace, and to do that you have to make them friends. And you can't do that by for example, after World War I, what we did to Germany is we forced them to pay reparations for the war, and it kept them in poverty. And those were seeds for World War II. It was used by Hitler to channel, to all that anger was used by Hitler to direct towards England and France. And but it's not. Rebuilding a country is not easy because it involves money, and there's always corruption, and everyone's trying to get a piece of the pie, and there's a lot of selfish interests involved. So it's not easy, but I think it has to be done.
Another point,
Yeah.
that there was a guy named Hoxsey that he could cure cancer. The thing with it is the AMA has got laws in every state saying that cancer can't be cured and so forth, and so he was prevented, except in Texas they had a law that allowed him to practice, so he had a clinic in Texas. Well, there was a senator in Pennsylvania that his wife got cancer, and he went to the regular doctors until finally they said, she's going to die in a few months, Well, he heard about Hoxsey's clinic in Texas, so he took her down there, and she was cured. And he was so amazed that he went back to Pennsylvania and drafted a bill to go there to be passed so that the clinic could operate in Pennsylvania. Well, they pigeonholed that bill until the next election, and the next election more money was spent in order to see that senator did not get re-elected than was ever spent on a presidential election.
That's interesting, maybe off the...
Yeah, I like, clearly the problem that we're in today is not about Afghanistan. It's about Islamic fundamentalism and how that leads to terrorism. And whether we win or lose in Afghanistan is not going to solve that issue. And so I'm just wondering from your perspective, whether you see a path that has any chance of actually succeeding that could resolve the fundamental issues that the radical Islamic people have against the United States and the West, our position on Israel, our position. Is it just that we support Israel? Is it that we have troops in Saudi Arabia? Is there, there's no way that America is ever going to say Israel's going to go away. There's no way that Israel's ever going to allow Israel to go away. And that's a fact. At the same time, what is the path that more moderate elements on the Islamic side, maybe more moderate elements on the side of the West and within Israel could actually settle on that is a solution that would be an end to the fundamental issues that are causing this rise of terrorism.
Right.
Is it an international city in Jerusalem, giving back Gaza, a Palestinian state? What combination of things really was, or is there no possible solution?
Well, I mean, there are solutions, right? Basically, you have extremists on both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian issue. You have the Orthodox Jews who make up a small, minority, very small minority, but they have a lot of influence. And they would like to see the West Bank being part of Israel, right? That's why you have settlements in the West Bank. Then you have extremists on the side of the Arabs, which would like to see Israel, as you say, go away. Neither position is possible. Israel cannot fly away. On the other hand, there has to be, a Palestinian state. And the Palestinian issue is so fundamental to the whole problem that Bush and Blair came out saying, we now recognize the right of a Palestinian state. And that was always implied, but it was never publicly stated.
When did they say that?
This was just,
Get it out ago.
yeah, I don't know the exact date, but after September 11th. And Israel, you have 50 years of conflict. And this is 50 years of hate evolving, right? I mean, it's not the fault of the Israelis or the Arabs. In particular, it's the conflict itself. 50 years of this conflict. And the Arabs always lose these wars. So, that's difficult too. And so you have generations, 50 years. How many generations do you have? Which are growing up, thinking of Israel as an oppressor. And this is what is fundamental to terrorism. It's this hate. It's a collective thinking, a mentality that has evolved over a long period of time. And so, to win the war against terrorism, there has to be a transformation of this thinking. And to do that, the United States has to be much more aggressive and pushing for a Palestinian state. Right? And it has to join with the international community, with Europe, with England, and come up with a solution which is fair to the Palestinians. And basically pressure Israel into accepting something, which everyone agrees on, something that's fair, which is considered fair to the Arab community. And most Arabs would accept Israel if there's a Palestinian state. When they say all Israelis should leave except those whose ancestors are from this area, and the Israeli state should not exist. This is, to a large extent, this is a negotiating position. They take an extreme, position. But if there's something fair, then you're going to have the majority. I'm talking about 90%, 95% of the Arabs accepting it, and the rest maybe not accepting it, but not having all this anger. We don't like Israel, but at least the Palestinians have their state, and they seem to like it, and so forth.
And are you think these issues really are at the root of
it's the root of all the anger. 50 years.
The clash of Western culture with, in general, on a much broader scale, and we just have a very radically different culture and different set of values, fundamentalist.
Well, that's part of it. But if you look at Iran, this is a good example on that theory, because in Iran we had the Shah, and the Shah was, pushing the country into the 21st century. And they didn't like being pushed, and there's this tremendous reaction against that. And the Shah was taken out, and they had the Khomeini, and you had this, and the United States was the devil, and so forth. And but a new generation has grown up since then, and most Iranians like America. They don't hate America. And it's possible for the Islamic culture to take what it considers to be valuable from the Western culture, and it doesn't have to watch the movies that come out of Hollywood. We don't force it on them. It's not the United States doesn't force the culture on them, but in a situation where they have this anger that's been created, this image of America as an oppressor, as Israel is coming in and oppressing the Palestinians. When you have that as a backdrop, as an underlying axiom to their worldview, and then you have the United States putting soldiers in Saudi Arabia, they become a problem because of the underlying thinking that the United States is an oppressor. But if their image changes, then that thinking changes. It would be less of a problem. It may still be a problem, but it would be less of a problem. But the thing is the hate. How do you counter the hate? You counter it by addressing the issues. In this case, in the case of Israel, it's the Palestinian state. Israel has a right to exist. Palestinians have a right to have a state. And let's figure it out. In the case of Iraq, there are these sanctions, which are having adverse effect on the children and the old, the weak. Some argue that it's really the responsibility of Saddam Hussein, because Saddam Hussein, is the one who's responsible for his people, and if he was, a good ruler, and so forth and so on. But we know who Saddam Hussein is, and we know what he's going to do if we have sanctions. So we know that there are going to be people who are going to suffer. So the United States shares in the responsibility, and this issue has to be resolved. So resolve the issues and have a strong public relations campaign. United States we're not oppressors, we're liberators. We believe in freedom of religion. We believe in this, so forth and so on. But the United States has to counter that image and the Islamic world.
What's the difference between the Palestinian state and Israel? You keep referring to them, but it's confusing to me.
Well, there was an area called Palestine. And
City called Palestine.
well, there was like a region called Palestine. And it was divided by the United Nations in 1947, around that time, into a Jewish state, Israel, and an Arab state. But it was, at the time, the Arabs rejected the idea and attacked Israel, and that began the war. And so the Arab state never evolved, was never able to evolve. But if you take Israel and the occupied territories and bring them together, that territory comprises what was originally Palestine.
So that would mean dissolving Israel.
No. The Palestinian state would be composed of the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and a presence in eastern Jerusalem. Basically, that would be a Palestinian state. That would be the Arab state with, the Palestinian region. The term Palestine is not used anymore for that region. It's used for a future state, Arab state. It's a little confusing, but I think you understand.
Me?
Yeah.
bit of a naive question, but I've tried so hard to answer it, newspapers and whatever. What gave the United Nations the right to go in and create an Israeli state? And how did that whole thing come about? Because to me, just from looking at the basic facts, it seems like a very aggressive and unjust thing to do.
Well, what happened is you had, it goes way back, right? The Ottoman Empire. And Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire fell. And the League of Nations put certain areas under what they call mandate. They gave certain countries the mandate to administer these territories. And the idea is they would administer these territories until they became self-sufficient. And then they would become a country. So the Brits had a mandate over Palestine. And there was during this time a move of Jewish people to Palestine. It was their homeland. And many of these people were from areas that where the Jews were oppressed. And many were from like Poland and Eastern Europe. And so they were not familiar with the culture there in Palestine. And so they kept to themselves, and they spoke Yiddish and so forth. And so they developed this, a separate identity. most of them came, the Great Wave came during World War II because of the Holocaust. Now, the British, because they were administering Palestine, they had to deal with the situation. So they're thinking maybe we should divide it, maybe we should have some sort of binational government, maybe this, maybe that. They couldn't resolve the issue. They couldn't resolve the problem. The problem was a growing Jewish community which had a unique identity, and the Arab community, which began to resent this growing population, or they considered to be basically European. So they gave it to the United Nations. You guys, resolve this. And the United Nations made the big mistake of not of resolving it without the Arab countries. Right? The Arab countries rejected the whole idea of having a Jewish state, so they wouldn't come to the meetings and so forth. So they just went ahead and divided. Here's a Jewish state, here's the Arab state, and it's solved. Right? So it wasn't solved, and so here we are. And so it would have been better if they were a little patient and kept working with the Arab states until they come to a consensus, but they didn't. This person, then this person, then this and this person. Yeah.
I would like to see how you view you described sort of the cultural flow into Afghanistan. You described one of the groups as, of course, Arabs that have come in to be part of the Taliban.
Right, yeah.
So they source out of the core Middle Eastern area, which is really the Palestinian issue, is what has driven that kind of radical.
Yes, fundamental to their thinking, yeah.
So, I mean, one of your representations about pulling together the Great Council, etc. I try to ask the question: well, do the Arabs just go home and forget about their?
No, they fight with the Americans and with the Northern Alliance troops and other anti-Taliban troops.
The Arabs would?
They fight. They surrender. They sneak out. Through Iran. They, whatever. But
You mean fight this way?
yeah.
But that
Not companion.
Bang. Yeah. Well, no, not again. Well, no. They'll.
You fight with, like we fought with England against Germany.
Okay. They're going to fight against.
Again.
I'm sorry. It's a grammatical mistake on my part.
So I was thinking about this. So then, okay, let's just say we are able to establish our influence in Afghanistan and sufficiently drive out the Taliban. They retrench back into, the Sudans and the Egypt and the Taliban. Just basically move the war from one theater to another.
Well, in a sense. But in a sense, no, because first thing, the problems in Afghanistan are being addressed. The Taliban are being toppled, a new regime is being put in place, the network is being destroyed there, and so there's a certain change in the whole thinking of the world. I mean, it affects the thinking of the world where they see this transformation occurring. Now, a lot of these people bin Laden will probably not be captured or killed. He may be, but there's a good chance he won't. He'll go off somewhere else, and he'll be hunted until it'll be a long process. Maybe it'll take a year. I don't know, but maybe it'll be tomorrow. No one knows. But there's a good chance he'll sort of sneak out, and and then the global war will follow. And if he goes into, for example, Syria, then Syria has to decide, make this fateful decision. Should they bend to the international will, or should they protect bin Laden? And most likely they're going to bend to the international will. After all, all the Islamic states came together in conference and condemned him and his network of terrorism. So
that was really truthful, or just a politically expedient thing to do?
Well, it's in accord with their, I think, in accord with their beliefs and in accord with Islam. But it doesn't necessarily jibe with the feelings of people who live there, with the person on the street. I mean, there's a certain amount of sympathy in the street.
You know, could you check this fact? I read that the states themselves, say Palestinian states and even Saudi Arabia, Egypt, pay families whose children have been used as suicide bombers. There's state payments. They have a payment system. Is that something you're aware of?
I don't know. I don't know about that. I know the details of state sponsorship is not clear to me. I know what constitutes state sponsorship and
One-time payments.
I think
you
the
know.
mom is the one that gives $10,000 to every family who's...
No, but it's not just Iraq. It's Saudi Arabia actually has a system of payments.
But I seriously doubt it would be from the government. It may be from private individuals.
Okay.
And a lot of the problems in Afghanistan and Pakistan, well, Taliban are also funded by private individuals from Saudi Arabia.
Now, I have one final point of clarification to kind of check my records. The reading I've done, the way you represented it, is that we gave $3 billion to Pakistan, and Pakistan created this monster. My understanding is that the CIA was actively on the ground creating the training camp that we now are systematically blowing up.
Right.
But that I also read a story that was rather interesting, that in the initial stages of fighting against the Soviets, our plan supporting the Mujahideen, or whatever you call it,
Right.
was failing, and that the CIA, in concert with the ICI,
Right, yeah.
ICI, actually cooked up the idea of introducing jihad to, you know, a warrior who's got passion, and for 3 or 4.
Right. Well, I talked to someone who worked for the CIA during this time, and he said, what he told me is that they wanted to give more money to the moderates, and that the idea of giving it to the fundamentalists was mainly Pakistanian. And it was their idea because most of the militants, the fundamentalists, were found in the Pashtun ethnic community. And they have this connection with the Pashtuns. So that's the connection. And the CIA was there, but the CIA, you know, there's a lot of deference to Pakistan. Right, and I'm sure they made a lot of money from it. I don't think all the money, you know, was given to the Mujahideen. I think a lot of it went into their pockets. So
This is my final point, actually, is that you've got your big council in Afghanistan.
right.
All that vested interest that Pakistan has in this region, are they just going to go home and forget about it?
Well, you know, they had I wouldn't say they're going to go home, but their thinking has to be. It has to. I just got attacked by a fly. Their thinking has to change, and it has changed. All right. I mean, they've made the decision that they're now, you know, they have to separate themselves from this militancy, and they can no longer support. And they can't play this game of propping up a government in Afghanistan. Keeps coming back. So, you know, I mean, I think there's been a transformation in Pakistan on this one issue. There's also the issue of Kashmir, and they're connected. They're still supporting militants in Kashmir. So, I mean, that also has to change. But there's this, when you had raised your hand, there was someone over here, right? Oh, there's this, well, you two guys, you know.
Underlying more than usually an economic reason, there's some value there. What do you see as sort of the economic reason for Afghanistan existing, and why
Well, there's this.
Pakistan want to control it, or Russia?
No, well, you know, there's a theory about oil, right, that you hear a lot.
Yeah.
But it's not, you know, the problem with that theory is that the only way to have an oil pipeline through Afghanistan is to have a peaceful Afghanistan. You can't really have a peaceful Afghanistan if you support only one ethnic group. There's going to be civil war. So it doesn't make a lot of sense.
It's tied to a similar question then. Do the Afghanis have the cultural wherewithal to even create a nation state if their primary loyalty seems to be on a tribal level? And as you said, you can rent one, but you can't own one. The sense of loyalty seems to be something that's easily bought. And so if you're trying, I mean, is it an illusion to think you're going to actually create a unified state out of a tribal mass?
Well, there was a unified state for a long time. And the Afghans had their ways of doing things. They had these chieftains, and it was a feudal system, right? Mm-hmm. That's what, the tribe. You have the tribe, you have the leader of the tribe, and you had the leader of the tribes, right? And the leader of the tribes, it goes up like this. And then you have the king. And that was the feudal system. And they're growing out of feudalism. They're making the transition. And when the king was...
That's the question. What makes us think they're able to grow out of feudalism? We talk about having a democratic a Western democracy.
Well, they were doing so before the Soviets invaded. They had made a lot of progress before the Soviets invaded.
Why did the Soviets
Okay. Here's an old map I was given to by our librarian, Jim. And you guys can't see it, but this is Afghanistan here. This is Afghanistan right here. And here's the Soviets, right? And they had all this area. And this little piece right here is the only space between Afghanistan and the sea. Right? So if the Soviets had control of this area, they had a very good shot at the sea, and they could have a port here. And it's also the crossroads of Asia, right? Between this whole area and China and up into Soviet Union and down through. It's strategic. It's basically military. And there's also there is oil interest. There's oil in this area that could be pipelined down through this. And to what? But they were after this before oil was an issue. It's called the Great Game between the Brits and Russia, and it was played in this area. Trying to gain influence in Afghanistan. And that's why the Brits went in twice and invaded Afghanistan to secure it.
Last century or when?
That was in, 1800s. And Afghanistan became independent from Britain in 1919. But basically it's strategic. The crossroads of Asia. Okay, thank you.
To do with the Palestinian state then, because
Well, not this, no, not that.
they over.
Yeah, that's a whole different story, right? The doctor.
How stable is Pakistan? I get the impression that they've got the military government, but then that probably a lot of people there really are not necessarily taking taking the Western side in this. That probably a lot of people really are more fundamentalist Islamics in Pakistan. And can we really depend on Pakistan? Is that government going to hold it?
Well, it's really shaky. Pakistan has a history of governments falling and new ones arising. And they have nuclear weapons. But the army traditionally has been the stabilizing, ironically, like and Latin America. There has been this long tradition of the military being the final say in what happens politically. So when there's instability in the government, the military comes in and restores order, and then it's supposed to, return to its status as a military, and it doesn't always do that. Well, Pinochet did that. But yeah, Pakistan, I'm not a prophet, but Pakistan is, is in a really, sticky situation. And they have, again, this monster I referred to, this fundamentalism, which is very angry with what the government is doing. But at least Powell thinks that they're able to manage the situation. And it's not been as much of a mess that they anticipated. I don't know if that's true, but there has to be, Pakistan has to, again, make this decision. They have to resolve not to use violence as a way to pursue their political ends, meaning their interests in Kashmir and Afghanistan. They have to make this decision. We're going to find a different way, to resolve these differences. We're not going to support these militants, because in the end, the militants turn against them. It turns against the Pakistani government. They turn against the civilian population. They're not good citizens. So it's a big problem, but they're in a situation where they're forced to resolve it, I think.
My question has to do with the actual combatants on the ground. They're from all these diverse areas and whatnot, and how committed are they, to actually following through with this, and how many of them got sort of sucked into it? Is there a large proportion that will really go to the end, or are a lot of them just there because they ended up in that situation?
On which side are you?
On the Taliban, but also on the Northern Alliance, that to some degree also.
Well, on the Taliban side, I think the committed ones are the Arabs, and some of the Pakistanis who are trained, and the Pashtun soldiers who are really trained in these madrasas, and are just convinced and what they're doing. But if I was to make a guess, I would say that would be maybe a third of the army. Or half, I don't know. On the Northern Alliance side, a lot of these soldiers are there because they've witnessed atrocities by the Taliban. So you have this front line above Kabul, and you have Taliban on one side and Northern Alliance on the other side. And a lot of the soldiers there are from all these villages in that area. The Taliban had taken that area and they committed atrocities, trying to force them out of this area and move somewhere else. And all the soldiers are there from these villages who are really pissed off with the Taliban. So they're committed. And then you have a large number of them who are soldiers because they have to be fed. And there's where else are they going to go to get food?
Both sides, you're saying that?
From both sides, but particularly from the Northern Alliance, because the Northern Alliance now has more food, right, than the Taliban. And you'll probably have more Taliban soldiers defecting because they get more pay, they get more food. But you have a culture, you have a country where people are starving, and soldiers at least they get fed, and that's why they're there. And as long as they get fed, they'll probably stay there. I mean, the stomach is a big motivator.
I'm fighting.
Doctor?
What do you see happening as the war goes on, as it probably will, into Ramadan?
I don't think it's a real big issue, because the Taliban have fought. They've fought before in Ramadan, and what happens in Ramadan is the idea is to fast during the day. So you don't drink water, you don't eat, and they'll do that part, but they'll still fight. When I was there during Ramadan, and they would get up real early in the morning, and they have this feast right before sunrise. And then after the sun goes down, they have another feast. So they're not really fasting. They're just not eating when the sun is up. You know.
You were talking about this consensus among Islam nations to defend the Taliban, and I read and you also mentioned that it's often at odds with a certain grassroots support. You know, at least very strongly for the mission of the Taliban. Isn't that kind of creating a dangerous situation?
Oh.
You also mentioned, and in the press you mentioned, well, we feel confident in the ability of these governments to control, you know, these elements of people, and even that sounds even more ominous than what.
I'm not really. Is there a question? This.
Well, I'm just wanting your feedback on that. I mean, maybe
Oh.
that's a concern. I mean,
Okay, they're
saying like yuppies in Saudi Arabia, and these are Western educated people, professional people, doctors and lawyers. They say that at that level, you know, Bin Laden is almost becoming a folk hero. You know, and yet the governments are, you know, united in condemning the Taliban. There's
Well,
grassroots support for the mission. Isn't that a dangerous situation? And can we really want to have a position that, well, we're confident that they can control those?
Yeah, well, you know the saying, the vocal minority and the silent majority.
But are we really confident that that's the case?
Well, you know, it varies from place to place, obviously, but you know, that's why I say the United States has to, you know, they have to engage in a public relations campaign, and you know, not propaganda, just basic facts, and make basic facts known to the Islamic community by word and by action. You know, our own involvement in Afghanistan and in the Middle East, change of foreign policy, for example, a Marshall Plan, all these things, and I think the majority of Muslims don't agree with, you know, this idea of killing civilians or innocent people. I mean, that's not a. Well, the underlying cause maybe they may agree with, but that's okay. It's the action. It's the. I know you don't want to confuse the way in which Bin Laden is pursuing his interest and the issues he's concerned with, because some of the issues may be valid or may not be, but it's a separate issue. The main issue is the means. Terrorism is an attempt to change something politically by using terror. It doesn't work. You know, it's not an effective way to change things politically, but it's a way that some people choose because they're inclined to violence, and right. But they're two separate things that have to be distinguished. And for example, when Giuliani rejected the $10 million, and this was in the news, because it was given with a statement that the United States should review its policy on Israel and in Palestine. Giuliani took that to mean that he was justifying these acts, but the Saudi was not. I mean, he was, you know, his statement was not justifying the acts. He was just simply stating a fact that everyone knows, that there is this problem in the Middle East that creates this anger, and anger fuels violence, but it doesn't justify it.
And but that's easy for us to say, but for those who are angry, are they always making that distinction?
Well, I would, you know.
Because these young, I mean, just what I read, you know, these are well-educated people, and they're saying what you're saying. Well, we don't agree with terrorism.
Right.
But the guys become a folk hero because the anger is so.
Well, folk hero meaning that the person on the street who's dealing with, you know, with images and slogans. They're not dealing with truth. They're not dealing with facts. So that's why I say there has to be this campaign, public relations campaign. These are the facts. You know, he's not a hero. He's a murderer. The issues, and separate the act from the issue. The United States does support a Palestinian state. We are trying to, to resolve the issue in the Middle East, so forth and so on. They have to counter those slogans. Politics is a realm of slogans, political rhetoric and images, especially for the average citizen who doesn't spend long times reading the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. They just, their pictures and their slogans, and there's, I know what it's a protest in the streets. They have these signs and and the pictures of Bin Laden, and it's an emotional event. It's not a very intellectual thing.
When did Muhammad live?
Muhammad?
When did he live?
Oh, I don't know the exact dates. 600? Yeah, around there. 600, 700.
Died 732 or something.
What roles, if any, does the opium production and drug trade have to do with this?
Well, it supports the Taliban. And it's become the largest source of opium in the world. So that's one of the things that will have to be done. I mean, there's terrorism, but there's also this opium problem.
So if we oust the Taliban, then we might solve a large problem to boot.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, maybe the prices will rise, and I don't know. But at least Afghanistan won't be the source of opium. The largest source of opium will then go to Burma. There'll be more money for Burma.
Before the Taliban?
What's that?
Who benefited from the opium before the Taliban took over? The Northern Alliance?
I don't know the history of the Taliban production, but when it started, and all I know is from when I was there. I had some involvement, some discussions with the Taliban on that. But the thing is, you have all these farmers who are making money growing opium, so there has to be some sort of program to re-educate them.
What is the percentage of the economy? Do you have a sense on?
Well,
We're talking about having a Marshall Plan to rebuild something. It seems like.
Well, rebuild everything, or to build, build from.
Rebuild. In other words, like in Germany and in Japan, there was an economy that was of value.
Well,
what's of value there?
What's the value?
Yes.
Well, I mean, this is not my, it's agricultural, a state. You have farming, you have, you have sheep. They make rugs. There's a lot of wool production, and they have this, this rug industry. They have mining. Have semi-precious gems. I don't know what else, but it's not of course, there's no manufacturing. They don't have electricity or anything. But yeah, I mean, they could, they have to develop their agriculture, and that's where if the state of Iowa is interested in helping, they can provide a lot, because as an agricultural state, they have institutions with expertise in agriculture. They can go in there and they can help them. Change, develop their agriculture and change the whole opium production into something else. Corn, I don't know.
I think the reason why they had to have opium was because when the Soviets were afraid that their communist state was going to dissolve and came in and tried to make it stronger, they decimated the place, and they had other ways of making money before that, I believe, because they had educated people and doctors, and
Well, Kabul was an international city before the Soviets came in. You had expatriates who lived there. It was one of the tourist spots. If you travel, everyone goes through Kabul. I know they had. It was a great city, and now it's You know, it's just destroyed. I mean, that, you know, Kabul can become an international city again, and it may be so. It may be created as an international city with all these aid groups coming in after the war. And you had, you know, you had this international city, and you had, you know, a great university there, and then then you had this rural life, you know, which was very separate. You know, mud, you know, houses made up of these mud walls, which are like this thick, for insulation. And
do you feel that the people of Afghanistan feel oppressed by the Taliban's rule?
Yeah.
And why, there are so many more of them than there are the Taliban leaders. Why isn't there a general uprising, a revolution?
You know, there is from time to time. The Taliban, people resist the Taliban, but they're, you know, the Taliban have the guns. That's the problem. The same case with the Saddam Hussein. I don't think that the Iraqi people don't like Saddam Hussein, but
the people don't have weapons. They're not allowed to have weapons.
well, if they hide them, if they keep them hidden, but there's no policy like in the United States where you have a license and. Yeah. No, I mean, you know, they take away guns. Sure.
But you know, what country was that recently where they just took over and they got Milosevic out of there and put in a new ruler because they felt oppressed? I mean, a lot of people went out, they stood in the street, they had to get him out of there.
They had an army. They created an army there. It was a rebellion. And of course you have the Northern Alliance. I mean, they were already in place, but
here we are, we're helping by, you know, weakening the Taliban. We've got the Northern Alliance. Maybe there could be an uprising that people really...
Well, there are other groups in Afghanistan which would like to, you know, you have to build up, there has to be a certain strength to be able to resist them. You don't want to simply resist and be killed. I mean, right? So, at what point are you strong enough to resist?
Well, when you face starvation, it's, you know, it's like life.
Well, a lot of these people, of course, they're voting with their feet, right? They're all these refugees leaving. You have, you know, some millions in Pakistan and a lot in Iran. But it's not easy to just, you know, to rebel. It's not an easy thing.
But you know, we did it against the English. We rebelled against a superpower.
Well, we had George Washington and George Washington was trained in the British Army.
But George Washington was our fourth general. They had this guy, and then he had a battle, and he ran faster than his people trying to get away from the British. And the next guy, he ran. Next guy, and Washington kept coming in saying, "I want it." So finally, they gave it to him, and he won it.
Good night. But I mean, basically, the answer is you just, you know, you have to be strong to resist. And the Taliban are tough, and they're not very friendly when you're resisting them. And there are a lot of stories. You know, I don't want to tell them, but you know, there's all these atrocities could be committed by people resisting. I'm not talking about with guns, just small resisting. You know, like just arguing with them, putting up an argument, and you're dead.
It would seem to me you were talking about this PR campaign to overcome something like, you know, what, 25, 50 years, whatever. It seems to me that it would have to be a little more massive than that. When you think about the fact that the Crusades took place and the popes, the militant popes, sanctioned going into the Muslim capitals and, you know, doing what they wanted to do. And then the whole notion of Western European colonial mentality of rolling into a country and claiming it, sort of ignoring indigenous cultures that have been there and had their own civilizations, their own values. They've done that time and time again, it's not just America, it's the whole Western European mentality
Right.
that, you know, sort of disregards anything that is not of our, you know, same values, same
Right.
society. So it's like, it's all right if you go in and subvert culture or bring in all your values, because you'll, by might and right, are the superior culture. And it certainly occurred to me as an Arab sitting down, I was trying to be sort of the devil's advocate. I'm thinking to myself, well, gee, England and America finally, you know, acknowledged the fact that I have a right to a Palestinian state. It's like, who are you to say anything?
Yeah.
Well,
He's like, thank you, God.
I mean, the United States, and this is a PR question, and the United States has to distance itself from the past, from the Crusades, right?
A lot of past.
Obviously, you know, it's a long time ago. And
this rage and everything has been building up, like, not for 25 years, it's like massive.
yeah, well, you know, it depends on what you're measuring. But the thing is to focus on the present, not the past, and to not only to speak good words, but to act, to have good acts, and this is the main thing. To go in and to do something which the world can see as uplifting to the culture. So what has to be done in Afghanistan is there has to be this massive effort to get them to work together and create a new country that is Afghan. It's not American, it's not Pakistani, it's not Indian, but it's Afghan. And that's going to be a lot of work, but that's the only way to do it right. You can't go in and impose some sort of system where you have, okay, this group will be called the Republicans and this group will be called the Democrats, right? And you'll have a president, and it doesn't work. You can't do it that way. Yeah.
Well, I must be the only one in the room that's scared, because nobody's asked you. Nobody's asked you at all to comment on what our impending fate might be with the terrorist acts that are happening in this country. And I was kind of curious to know, what your thoughts are about that, because bin Laden may be off, as you said, and he may or may not be caught, and he's trained all these terrorists who've gone out, and they have their own energy now. They do what they want to do. So, this anthrax thing and so on could increase, and other things, more bombings and so on. So I'm wondering, do you see that settling down at all or getting worse?
I don't know.
Prophet. I need a prophet.
No one knows. The only thing that the United States can do is just pursue a good, a wise policy. That means this public relations campaign and the policing and the coalition building, and there's no way of. I mean, the best defense is a strong offense in this case. Offense both on the public relations level and on a policing level. But you have to deal with the underlying issue of anger and hate that's in the world. It has to be transformed into tolerance and understanding.
Do we have time, or are they going to bring us down before it gets where we want it to be?
Oh, I seriously doubt anyone's going to be coming to Fairfield.
We do have mail.
Yeah. But I can't of course, I can't answer that question. But As long as they're on the run, then it's more difficult for them.
Okay.
It's much more difficult.
So there's a lot of increased pressure.
If they're on the run, both in terms of, again, the military, I mean, literally on the run, and also this campaign of changing the image of America, where there's no incentive, where people start thinking, wait, why do this? What's the incentive?
Yeah.
What's the purpose?
Do you at all think that any of this has been done by militant American groups, or do you feel that it's all being done by foreign people?
I don't know.
I mean, it would be so handy. I mean, for them to just kind of step in and go, oh, okay,
Well,
it's our thing now.
there's the McVeighs,
Yeah.
of course.
Mm-hmm. Those guys.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is where you have to distinguish between issues and actions, and the way to address issues. And the issue for McVeigh was a federal government, the FBI, which is overreaching which is abusing its power. And it's a real issue. I mean, it's a legitimate issue, and it has to be addressed. But it's not a very effective way. Bombing, killing people, innocent people, is not effective. And basically, he was a terrorist. It was a terrorist act.
You referred to some of the people in the Northern Alliance being willing to negotiate and step, for example, to the co-leaders. I'm just wondering, did you encounter people among the Taliban who were open to negotiating? And when you talk about getting these group of people together, have a council or whatever, do you talk about including the Taliban?
Well, that's an issue that's being debated now, whether the Taliban will have any part in the Lower Jirga. And there's some would like to see moderate Taliban be part of it. But how do you define a moderate Taliban? Well, you draw the line here, and I draw the line here, and it's just a matter of interpretation. But yeah, I met some. For example, the governor of Kandahar wanted to have women back in the workplace, but he was there was too much resistance. He couldn't do it because of the religious police. So the governor of Kandahar, I would say, would be a moderate, and I think it would be okay for him to remain as governor of Kandahar, for example. And there's the Minister of Information who resisted the destruction of the Buddhist statues. So, there's some who have leanings, moderate leanings. But you also have to understand, when you have this huge council, you can have, how many Taliban are there? There are not that many. The Taliban, you have the leadership. And the bulk of what we know as the Taliban is the army, which is, the backbone is the Arab Bin Laden's 55th Brigade, they call it. They're not going to be part of the Lower Jirga. The Pakistanis aren't going to be a part of it. So, let's say you have half a dozen Taliban. Half a dozen and a group of 1,000 is not going. They're not going to have that much influence. And I doubt if any one of them will be voted in as a member of the cabinet. This is just my thinking. Probably the people who will be voted in leadership roles for the new government will be people who are not involved in the civil war, most likely, and who have some sort of respect, wide respect by the Afghan people. So you're not going to have that many in the Northern Alliance, or certainly not Taliban.
I didn't come to the beginning